All right. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to another Danish Sound Cluster webinar. Pedro here, your replacement host. Again, I'm sorry that Jeppe couldn't come, but he will be here at some point. But for now, it will be me. So this webinar will be about audio development using gaming engines. And today we have two very renowned guests, so it's a pleasure to have these two guests here. I'll start by giving you a little introduction about what we're going to talk about, and then also explain you the structure of the webinar, introduce the guests, and then we'll get to it. So in this webinar, we will dig deep into the development using different engines, such as Wwise and MPEG codecs. You will learn more about that. We will also look at things from a historic perspective, and both backwards and looking forwards into the audio experience development and how the user experience and interaction is evolving. So a bit general, but I'll leave it to the guests to get more into detail. Before I introduce you the guests, I just want to tell you a little bit about how this works. Some of you already know, some of you don't, but basically we have these two guests and they go one after the other. Maybe there'll be one or two questions in between, but we will reserve the Q&A for the end of the webinar. So if you have questions and when you have questions, as soon as you have the question, there's a button down there saying Q&A. You go there and you write your questions so that by the end, we have plenty of questions to go through. And of course, the first questions to pop up is the first questions we're going to answer. So don't shy away, please. Don't write it in the chat because it's a little bit confusing for me to go through the chat. It's much easier if you use the Q&A instead. This, as you already heard, will be recorded. So you can also revisit this later in the internet, specifically in our website. You can go to the event link, and then there's a YouTube link there that you can revisit if you want to watch it again. There's a small questionnaire at the end of this. So when you press exit, there's just a small 5-question questionnaire, and you can help us by providing some feedback, and hopefully it will get better and better with your feedback. So now I would like to start by introducing the guests in order of appearance. And first we have Simon Ashby, who's the head of product at Audio Kinetic and also a co-founder of Audio Kinetic. Simon is responsible for the product development of Wwise and Strata. Prior to Audio Kinetic, Simon worked as a sound and game designer on a series of games developed by Ubisoft Montreal. Simon is also a frequent lecturer and panelist, and his main theme is the role of sound production and integration for video games and other interactive media. So welcome, Simon. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
Great. So now, and then after Simon, we will have Niels Peters. Hi, Niels. So Niels is Associate Professor of Audio Signal Processing at the International Audio Laboratories Erlangen, which is a joint institution between the Friedrich Alexander University, Erlangen, Nuremberg, and Fraunhofer IIS, which I'm sure a lot of people know, the MP3 guys. Sorry, I had to say it. So before joining the International Audio Laboratories, Niels was a senior staff research engineer and manager for 3D Audio at Qualcomm's multimedia R&D department in San Diego. And he was a postdoctoral fellow at UC Berkeley, received a PhD in music technology from McGill, which is also in Montreal, which is an interesting coincidence in this webinar because Wwise is also from Montreal. Yeah, and welcome, Niels. It's lovely to have you here as well. It's a strong team. So
thank you very much.
Thank you. So yeah, I don't think I have much else to say. I think that Simon is best if Simon starts because he will have a more introductory approach to the whole topic, and then we will also dive into 3D audio and all that. So Simon, if you want, the stage is yours.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Pedro, for the introduction. Welcome everyone. I just see names, so that's
maybe you recognize some.
Yeah, exactly. But it's always great when you see a bit the people and so on. But anyway, yeah. So thanks for inviting me to this panel, if we can say it like that. And when we started discussing that panel, so of course with Wwise we can cover a lot of things because we cover all part of the audio, the interactive audio portion of it. But because we had people from Fraunhofer, then we said, okay, maybe it's worth getting into spatial audio as well, and probably have some comparison between the two tech, and that might generate questions and all that. So I structured my little portion with maybe a general idea for what we do and how we do things. And I will jump into spatial acoustics, what we're doing, and that will be a segue for Niels after to really go deep down into what they do at Fraunhofer. So let me share a slide here, and I think it's working. So, and I couldn't resist to change the title of this conference. So when I saw gaming engine, I say, yeah, but you know why we're more like interactive sound engine. So anyway, that was just a little aside to start that with a smile. So you already introduced me, so I won't take more time on that. And so Wwise, so that's what we do. Wwise is a middleware or sound engine. And by the way, it's an acronym. So it's the WaveWorks Interactive Sound Engine. And WaveWorks was the original name of the company before we renamed the company to Audiokinetic. So, but we kept the WaveWorks Interactive Sound Engine, which was an interesting decision because there's still today people saying Wwise or Wwise or name-wise in all different ways. So, but anyway, so that's what we do. That's the user interface today. It was not looking as gorgeous 15, 17 years ago. And we've been there for a while. We incorporated the company early on in 2000. Took a few years, like 3 years, to get both the business plan and both the technology plan and our idea for Wwise and to get the funding to start working actively on developing Wwise, hire programmers and QA and build a team to arrive to releasing the first version of Wwise in 2006. And what is interesting is the very first game to release with Wwise was in 2005 with beta number 4 of Wwise. So that was quite a courageous studio that decided to use Wwise before it was officially released. So that was great. And it goes on. So we're based in Montreal, as Pedro was saying. And around 2013, we opened an office in Tokyo because, well, first traveling was kind of it's a long trip to get there, but it's also to, you know, do business with Japanese people. It's much easier if you do that between Japanese people for the language, for the culture and all that. And we've done the same later with by opening in Shanghai a studio. And last year, quite recently, like in October, we opened a studio in Hilversum. So that's in the Netherlands. So so yeah, so that's and by the way, 5 years ago, Sony Entertainment, Interactive Entertainment, so that's the PlayStation division, acquired Audio Kinetic. And it's been a, well, we had shareholders for a while, and they wanted an exit eventually. And for us, it took a while before we started discussing with Sony to find the right partner, because our interest, like the founders of Audio Kinetic, was not to, you know, sell the company and go away. It was really to find the right partners to help us grow and accelerate our plans and our vision that we have, well, since day one, and we still have, and so on. And it's been really good with Sony because they understood that we needed to remain cross-platform and totally independent, because we know what Microsoft is doing, and Nintendo and Google and Apple and all that. So we're kind of still super independent. We're super autonomous, but we're part of the larger family of being part of SIE and Sony Corporation globally. So, so I'm trying to, yeah, I'm starting large and we'll funnel things. So just to give you an idea for the markets we're in, of course, the gaming market, that's where we started. And that's where interactivity started anyway, in the first place. And many games, I received that picture from a game and said, perfect, that will be perfect for this slide. But what is really interesting, it's like we're not just after the AAA games and so on. We really wanted to cover, like, from the smallest independent developers to the largest corporation, and making sure that Wwise helps them not only from a technical perspective with the right tools, but also from, you know, a licensing perspective. So that it's affordable for the studios that have less deep pocket than the larger corporations. And even for the really small studios, it's free to use Wwise commercially and so on. Our idea with that is some of these studios will be successful, and eventually they will have more budget and they will be able to afford, you know, their license of Wwise. And it happened this way. Like, we had super small studios that now are really like medium or super large studios. So by helping people, you know, it's a great exchange in the end. So that's in the gaming. The LBE sector, the location-based entertainment, that's something that that was really booming just before the pandemic, and then the pandemic. So anything location-based kind of got paused at that moment. Except for the first NFL season, where they used Wwise to recreate the crowd reactions from each of the different stadiums for each of the team in the NFL. And somebody during the broadcast of the games, somebody was assigned with a MIDI controller in a Wwise project and was triggering the crowd reaction so that the live broadcasting was, you know, interesting and engaging for the viewers. So that, you know, that's the kind of project you never expect, and yet it happens, and it was well for them to use Wwise and easy to use and all that. So that was great. And theme parks and sophisticated escape games. So there's all sort of LB experience. Again, with some of the AAA studios like Disney and Universal, and much smaller companies like Trio Tech, for example, and VR Studios. So again, we try to appeal to everyone and provide a solution that makes sense technically and financially for them. And more recently, into the automotive sector, where we provide tools to help on the interactive sound generation. And I won't go into all the details because that's a topic in itself. So there's that. There's interactive sound generation and immersive audio rendering. And on that second side, what is interesting is the same value or the same gain that you have by using Wwise when you develop a game, which is, you know, easily you can prototype things and iterate and rapidly arrive to the results you're expecting. That's something we're bringing now to the automotive sector, where typically, if they're not using Wwise, everything is, you know, compiled in C++ or whatever other language. A lot of times there's like many companies involved. So when you want to change, like, can you push the music by 6 dB when this happened in the car? And it goes around a lot of people, it's hard-coded, and it comes back months later sometimes. you don't even remember what you asked for in terms of changes, where now they can be sitting in the car with a laptop and mixing in real time as the car is driven by somebody else, ideally, not yourself. Anyway, so that's something we bring to the automotive sector. So looking at the Wwise foundations, there's of course the runtime, the sound engine itself. That's the component that is responsible to render the audio on the various platforms that are driving interactive experiences or games. And for us, the name of the game is just to be sure that Wwise runs on any platforms available out there. So if there's something coming up, you can be sure that we're already involved or will soon be involved, because it has to be ready in time for all the game developers that will release their games on these new platforms, for example. And of course, it's important to have the sound engine of Wwise to be integrated into, you know, the popular game engines like Unreal and Unity. And more recently with Godot, although it's managed by the community, and also for the proprietary game engines, because there are still many developers, like mostly the big ones that can afford having a team building their own game engines. But it's important that Wwise can be easily integrated into any type of text like that. And so that's for the runtime portion. The authoring aspect, so that's the user interface, where the sound designers, the composers, and a lot of time the programmers as well, using the profiler to troubleshoot performance, memory usage, or, you know, race conditions, that kind of thing. So that's used really to build your content, integrate that content to the game, connect to the game, and mix in real time and assess what you're doing, making changes in real time as much as possible. So I just put a few bullets in there, but there's a lot of features and a lot of aspects that Wwise brings, obviously, in there. And finally, building an ecosystem that involves partners. So as a company, like our mandate is to make sure that Wwise runs on all the platforms, that we're as fast as possible on all those platforms in terms of CPU and not using memory, or, you know, the minimum amount of memory to do all that. And we specialize in certain aspects, but it's important to make it easy for partners to join with specific bits and pieces of technology to complement the offering, basically. And the way those partnerships are done is mostly the tech fixing a difficult problem for the game developers. For example, so one example is if you do a racing games, like having a convincing racing car sound engines, it's a difficult problem. And Rev, which is this partner there, it's Crankcase, the name of the company, their product is called Rev. They do just that, and they do it super well, and it fixed that specific problem. So there's a lot of people doing racing games that would say, okay, I'm using Wwise and I will use this plugin because it helped me, and, you know, problem solve, I can focus on whatever else. So building partners with the technology, but there's also the community. And the community for us is really important. And this is a snapshot of people connecting to the Wwise, the Audio Kinetic Launcher when they download or open a project, and with the IP address we can just locate from where, and it's really interesting to see where people are doing interactive audio with Wwise on the planet. So and there's some islands in there that I don't know their names, which countries they're associated to, but it's just fun to see that. And so we have a lot of our users in our system. There's about 1,500 developers that have used Wwise for professional, you know, for product they commercialize. The content providers are, you know, the specialized composers and sound designers, and more there are companies now of many people. And the content providers are really, you know, it's a team effort, because they're hired to produce content for specific games. And they oftentimes they push for Wwise because it simplifies their life and it's easier to iterate and come up with a good result. So for us, they really became an important ally into getting those games to sound better and better. And the academic aspect, or all the knowledge transfer aspect, is also something really important for us. Day one, when we released Wwise in 2006, we wanted to make sure that we had a full documentation, we had a simple project, and we were trying to have, I think we had a few months later a sample game where Wwise could connect on it, and we were providing as much content as possible to help people not only learning about Wwise, but learning about interactive audio in general. And later on, as we were organizing having a better team, we could focus on creating specific certifications about Wwise. And again, the material is all free. So that material is free. The only tax, if I may, is if you want to be recognized as certified 101, 201, or whatever, and you want to take the exam, and if you pass it, you receive your certificate, well, then there's a fee for that. But for the rest of it, the knowledge is something we want free, which for an audience mostly based in Europe at the moment is probably kind of normal and expected. But when you live in Canada and your neighbor south is the United States, free knowledge is not a concept that is really, that like, it's a business. School is a business, knowledge is a business in North America mostly, and that's not something we wanted to do in there. And so we have almost 200 academic institutions teaching Wwise, and this is across the planet. There's universities in Japan and Shanghai and in many places teaching Wwise, which is always cool to look in retrospect. We have our certified instructors, certified users, blog articles again, and most of them written by the community. And this is cool. So there's somebody that just completed a game and was trying to achieve something special and probably achieved it and decided to write an article around that, that we end up publishing on our site, but also translating in the 5 languages we support. So if that person wrote in English, then we translate that in French, in Japanese, in Chinese, and in Korean. And now we start having articles from, Chinese people, and we translate that to English. And there's a real international exchange of knowledge going on in the recent years. And that's another thing we're quite proud of. So, okay, so this is Wwise, and that's the main product we started with. And recently we introduced Strata. And so Wwise is the technology and Strata is the content. And together, I like to think of them of, the yin and the yang, they complement each other. So what is Strata? It's, well, in a nutshell, it's a sound effects library. But the twist is that, other libraries, typically you get the final sound that's been rendered by the artist and put inside a collection. Where with Strata, we, of course, provide that rendered file, but we also provide the multi-track project. In this case, we're using Reaper as the DAW that's been used to come up with the rendered file. And we really actually delivered the Reaper project and all the source files. So when you open this sound, so if this impact medium 01, let's say you have the impact and there's some debris in it, and those are wood debris, and you don't want debris at all, or you want a different type of debris, then it's really easy to right-click, find the associated project. It opens your Reaper project, put your play cursor at the right place, and from there, the debris might be, the red layer, and you can just mute that and re-render your sound, and you're good to go. Or you change the timing, or you put your own clips into that, or you change the effects inserted into the thing. So, and this is, well, first of all, we were quite surprised that nobody thought of that before, because it's all about, control and rapidly being able to customize a sound exactly to your need. And if that sound, you need to split it in 2 or in 3, because later in Wwise or in Unreal, in Fmod, in Unity, you want to attach real-time parameter control or state changes to some of the layers of your sound. Well, it's much easier if you start from the full DAW session instead of hacking your rendered files, right? So anyway, so that's the promise in there. And what is also important is we've done that with interactivity in mind. And interactivity means you need randomization. So any events, any collision sound, anything, you always need at least 6 variations. And if you talk about footsteps, you're going to need much more, right? So those are, you know, the vertical regions. Those are variations. And then you get your horizontal layers, which is your different components of the game. And that's been normalized across all the collections in there. And there's 41 currently. And every month we release at least one new collection. And our goal, after I don't know how many years, but our goal is to have Strata as a general library that covers, let's say, 80% of all your needs. We will never cover everything, but if we could reach to a certain level like that, then it's great. And you always have the possibility to just use some layers of a sound, mix that with some other layers and, you know, recombine and make it fit to your own. And if you're curious about that and you're a sound designer, you can download the free Strata collections, which are 1 Reaper project per collection for that we regroup together. You don't have the full plugins capabilities for Enrage, but as soon as if you subscribe and you get the full thing, then you unlocked everything. Ooh, okay, so that's end of my first portion before the second and final portion where I want to dig into what we do in spatial audio. And we're still debating about spatial audio, spatial acoustics. We're kind of in a phase where we're maybe rebranding how we want to go about that, because since like the moment that Apple arrived with Dolby Atmos and their headphones and they said this is spatial audio, now when you do geometry and really sophisticated thing and you name that spatial audio, people get confused a bit. So we want to reduce that confusion as much as possible. Okay, so that's something we've been working on for many years, and there's a lot of bits and pieces that have been introduced and developed. And please don't even try to read that. I'm just trying to say that we've been doing that for some time. Now, if we really go from, you know, it's really the basic, it starts with, you know, just a sound. Trying to get my presentation bar out of the way. Okay, so you need a source sound, and that will go to the output, right? Wise render that, send that to the device, and you finally hear something. So that's no spatial audio, it's just hearing sound. And then if you want 3D audio, you want to barrelize your sound, getting some spatialization, some distance attenuation, then of course you need more information, like where is the listener position and what is his orientation? So that's the microphone basically. And where are all the emitters and what are their position and orientation? And with that, okay, you can create 3D audio and barrelization. And where it starts getting, and this has been around for, you know, for decades, that's easy, or that's a solved problem almost. But where it becomes more interesting is when you start taking into account the geometry around you. And with that, you get with more complex phenomena like diffraction, transmissions, reflections, and late reverb. So that's where I will focus a bit more on that green box for the next few slides. And just to give you comfortable, maybe it's not super clear last time you've been introduced to those concepts. So when we talk about room transmission, it's really the ability for a sound to pass through a wall. So depending on the density, you know, and a lot of things that Niels will be in a much better position to explain all the details of that. Maybe, I don't know what he's going to be presenting, but I won't go into the maths and all that today for sure. So transmission is really sound going through the walls. Diffraction is the ability for sound to bend around objects. So contrarily to light, where when the light, you know, hit an object, it casts shadow. Audio doesn't care. Audio just bends around it and you'll hear it. And of course, there's some, you know, low pass filtering, like the low frequency will really easily go around objects. Higher frequency will be attenuated more. But in a nutshell, it has no problem diffracting around object. And finally, there's reflections, so bouncing of surfaces. And with reflections, there's two phenomena in there. And this is probably all stuff you know, but just in case, I just want to make sure that we're all going in the same direction. You probably saw those kind of graphs. So this is, you know, the shape of a reverb or your sound in the room. So you've got your direct path. So that's the red line. And then a few milliseconds later, depending on the size of the room, you're going to start having your first reflections from the floor, the ceiling, the walls around you. And in the case of Wwise acoustics, when we use geometry around us, now it's interesting to calculate those early reflections, because we get to receive where all those surfaces are, and we can calculate in real time those reflections, and it becomes much more rich, and it gives a really good sense of how close you are to walls and other big objects like that. And then there's the late reverb, of course, that's there, that will give you a really good idea for the type of size for the room you're into it, and the timbre of that room, and so on. So there are two different methods to in Wwise to leverage the geometry and leverage the acoustics. The first one is called the rooms and portals, which is a way to model the coupling between rooms. So you've got different rooms, and you've got connection between rooms that we call portals, and the sound can pass through portals. And we'll go into more details into that. And the other way is just using the actual geometry of the game. And when I say actual geometry of the game, it's not true. So using the visual geometry will just kill performance because there's just too many triangles in there. So typically what you need is a geometry that has been customized for audio, because you don't need all the little details. You need much more simplified rooms performance-wise in terms of memory and CPU, but also in terms of the sonic differences of a simple, shoebox versus something that has 2000 triangles, but it's still kind of a regular shape, rectangle type of room. It's going to sound approximately the same. So we're talking about runtime experience, so it's important to simplify things as much as possible. So with geometry, we can, like diffraction and transmission is ensured. There's the dynamic early reflections. But bottom line, what's important is that both systems can be used simultaneously. They are complementary. So you can use just rooms and portals, or just the geometry, or a bit of both systems, basically. So that's up to you. And the decisions why you would use one or the other or both is really on a per project basis. So what are your needs? How much time do you have in front of you? How much can you spend in terms of memory and CPU? And do you have the teammates to, inform the geometry and all that? So it's really a question from every project. You need to look at that and say, okay, those are the building blocks I'm going to be using for to customize my spatial audio experience in Wwise. So if we go a bit deeper into rooms and portal, so a room defines an acoustic environment. And if you look here in I don't know if you see my mouse, whoops, let me just go back, but you see those red rectangles. So those are rooms, and the green rectangles there are the portals. So this is basically doors or windows and things like that. And each of these rooms, when you define rooms and portals in Unreal or Unity, or if you integrate that into your own proprietary engine, you'll define, okay, what is the late reverb I want inside that room? And you also have optionally the ability to put a room tone. So that can be, fans or whatever room tones, because it's typical to have that. So we simplified that work. And then the portals connects these rooms, and the sound can pass through these rooms. So let's look at everything that is involved with rooms and portals. So as I was saying, there's the transmission loss. So there's, depending how you set that room and these walls, you can say, okay, that room is totally opaque sound-wise from the other room, because in the gameplay that we have, it's important that we don't know that there are monsters in that room, because we want people to be scared when they get it. And other games will say, no, it's really important that we hear the enemies there so that we can, tactically prepare for that. So it has nothing to do with audio. It's really the game experience driving what you should do in terms of those phenomena there. So for us, it's about, well, offering those options and making sure that people can leverage it the best they want. And if they used to have some room transmission, then they're going to have the control over the volume attenuation, low pass and high pass filtering of those sounds. And it can go down to a per sound basis, because yes, in certain games, it would say, it's important that I'm hearing the dialogue of somebody talking in the room, but not the footsteps and not the room tones, and not, I just want to hear the dialogue, because the game designers want it this way. So there's that. And if you're, so here, this blue shape here, that's your listener, and you've got your room in front of you. And what we do, because there's no opening, and the sound can pass through that wall by a certain extent. So we're kind of taking the extent of the room and say, we will open the spread value. That is something you control in the attenuation editing. And it kind of transforms into a volumetric emitter, even though it's the center of the room, that is the actual XYZ coordinate, but you get to hear that sound if it's, a real big object into that. Now, let's say that the garage door opens, and now you can hear what's inside that room. And now I will separate, the next few slides separates the wet path, and in a few slides we will see the dry path of the signal from that room. So the wet path, so what we have right now in those concentric circles is the reverb, the late reverb, and potentially the room tone that you have there. And the wet path of any other emitters in the room, like that is pushing like energy inside that room, and that energy will go through the door. But again, you're a listener and you're looking at the portal, you're looking at the opening. So you want to make sure that you hear, it's not a point at the door, it's really the full extent of the door where you get the sound going through that. And the way we do that is we're moving virtually the position of the emitter at the opening, so that the panning works with the visual opening that's there. And as you will enter that room, we keep the opening, and we will change sorry, I'm losing that word, the spread of that thing. So as you go in, so you're there, you go in, and there's more and more of that spread surrounding you. And it's over distance, and it's attached to the room. It's not, you cross that frontier and now you're in that room, and then you go back and you're in a different room, like we've had for a few decades. So now it's much smoother this way. So that was the wet path. Now let's look at the dry path. So let's imagine that we have somebody talking over there. So we still want to hear that voice through the portal. So how do we do that, or what Wwise is doing for that is basically we're virtually moving the position of that object to the opening so that it fits there, so the panning is ensured. And we will keep the same distance. So let's say if that was 10 meters, then the virtual position will be 10 meters away from that. So now you add your 10 meters plus the 5 meters there, you're at 15 meters in your attenuation curves, where you attenuate your volume per distance. Everything will make sense with that. And again, now we will take what is the diffraction path. So we'll take the angles from those things, and that will determine how much diffraction there is. And this, again, is a graph in Wwise where you draw your curve to say, okay, if I've got 50% diffraction computed by the system, what does it mean for my volume, my low pass filter, and my high pass filter? And that's you as an artist to determine how it's going to sound with that. Whew. Are you surviving that? We're almost done. Yeah. Okay. So that was rooms and portals. now there's the geometry aspect, and so that's to model complex interactions in the environment. We also have diffraction and transmission, and we also gain dynamic early reflections, which I will not cover in details because I don't think that's the point of showing every feature. That's a 2-hour presentation in itself. So I'm just trying to summarize what we do. So with geometry, the way it works is really there's the responsibility of the game is to send back to Wwise, when the level is loaded, to send back to Wwise the audio geometry that's been created for that level. And with that, we can now detect, all the edges to understand the geometry by sending, ray tracing in the environment. So we will take the incident direction. From that, we will cast rays and see all the others, the other edges that exist, and from that goes on both sides. And for each of these things, oh, and I cut some slide, but when you get to a first edge, then there's other detections to see the other edge, and then the next edge, and so on, because the sound travels around all those things. And we do that with a continuous ray casting. And it's done in a way that the game developer can decide how much or how many of these rays they want to be casted every frame. Because what a developer won't, and when I say developer, the tech lead and the programmers, what they don't like is a peak in CPU because that frees other systems and so on. So they want, as much as possible, something continuous. So in our case, we fire from 10 to 100 rays per frame, which is almost nothing in comparison with the millions of rays per frame for visual, right? So we're really, it's a really cheap consumption of resources if you compare with visual. So that allows to scan the environment, understand the geometry, look at every sound object's emitter's position and orientation, same thing with your listener. And with that, we can calculate all those phenomena that I was showing. So our goal with that, and I'm concluding with this slide, is like there's so many diverse applications, so many different type of projects, that what was important for us was not to offer something that is mimicking reality. It's something where you decide what you need for your project. And by that is, do you need something that looks like reality? Or do you need something that is much more creative because the gameplay dictates that, for example? So there's this angle where reality is just one aesthetic choice. And it sounds crappy in general, so I expect people not to go full-fledged on reality unless you want to design a concert hall. But reality sounds bad, so typically it's find something that sounds believable, that is still, we're doing entertainment, so it has to be entertaining, it has to help the storytelling and the gameplay. That's the goal. And on the other side, it's about performance, like how much can you afford? So of course, if there's not much going on for the rest of the game and audio can use more CPU and memory, you can go for super high accuracy. Or sometimes say, no, there's not enough budget for it, so we'll favor speed or less CPU usage, which is not correlated with the aesthetics, right? You can be super high accuracy in something creative or realistic. Those are independent concepts there. But what was important for us is to give all the building blocks and get the studios to easily customize what they need and nail something that will sound good, that will help the player performing the game or enjoying the story, and making sure that the performance will remain at a level that is acceptable for the game without spikes and without too many surprises as we go. That's it.
Great. That was very, very well explained. We even got some people appreciating that already in the chat.
Cool, thank you.
I think I'll leave the questions to the end, but Joanna already gave you explanation is great. So
Cool.
Great. All right, Niels, then Oh, also Andre, great intro to Wise. So getting a lot of love already.
Thank you, Andre.
So without further ado, I guess Nils, you can go and continue on what Simon has built up.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's all
Okay,
good.
great. Okay, thanks, Pedro. Yeah, this is my presentation on MPEG-I immersive audio. Just a disclaimer: this is not a game engine, and this is nothing um, along this line. Although some of the use cases might be a little bit similar. But first of all, MPEG-I immersive audio is a kind of upcoming standard, kind of a long-term stable compression format that supports 6 degrees of freedom audio for virtual reality and augmented reality. So what is MPEG? Many of you have heard this acronym before. So yeah, what is it? That's maybe my first question or the first part of my presentation today. So what is MPEG? So MPEG is essentially this kind of bunch of crazy people. This is the MPEG, the Moving Picture Experts Group. And this is a working group that creates many different coding standards for multimedia you use every day in everyday life. So you might not know about it, but it really enables a lot of multimedia experiences in TV and broadcast and media and audio. And this is a photo like a couple of months ago from the 144th meeting. So these people meet every 3 or 4 months every year. And you see, so this is a long-term project, and subset of those people you see, they are audio experts. They're dealing with audio coding standards. And let's take a look back a little bit when we think about MPEG audio standards. This all started back in the 90s with MP3, and the goal of MP3 was to compress stereo audio to a kind of to a size that can be more easily being delivered over computer media, and yeah, this was the famous MP3, as you mentioned, Pedro. This is maybe why you may know Fraunhofer also, because they were already involved in that development very heavily. Then roughly 10, 15 years later, advanced audio coding, AAC, was developed. This had a higher coding efficiency and also supported, besides stereo, also supported other channel configurations like 5.1 or in future and further extensions, even up to 22.2 loudspeaker channels. Yeah, many loudspeaker channels. When we go further to 2015, MPEG-H 3D audio was developed, and besides improved coding efficiency, also here was the first time that besides channels, also other audio concepts were supported. Object-based audio and higher order emisonics could be efficiently coded now. Besides that, also personalized rendering became an aspect that was important. And besides just coding, we suddenly developed something more like an audio system that is really about adapting the audio, like object-based audio, to your presentation environment and what loudspeakers you have placed and what positions and so on. This is also supported 3 degrees of freedom rendering for headphones. So the early days of virtual reality in 2015 or 2017, where you could move your head and the audio would adapt to that. So where do we go from here? The future is immersive. So the new standard that is upcoming, hopefully you will be finalized early next year. It is all about immersive audio, about 6 degrees of freedom that the user can navigate in the virtual world and also interact with this virtual world. And the goal is to have a kind of very immersive experience with that. So when you see this timeline, you see, roughly every 10 years, there's this kind of new standardization highlight. Those people we saw on this photo, they're not lazy in between those 10 years. They're working very hard on this, because standardizing is such a system takes a lot of time and effort. And with regards to MPEG-I, what I'm going to talk about today, these efforts started back in 2017 with initial discussions on what can we do after MPEG-H 3D audio, and so what can be the next kind of generation be about. So in 2019, a high-level feature set was defined, and in 2021, a call for proposal was issued. That means companies all about the world, interested parties, could join and propose a system or a codec or a rendering system based on those requirements that were defined before. And in 2022, then there was the evaluation of all those proposals that were submitted, and a so-called first generation reference model 0 was defined, and the specification was started to be written. If you want to learn more about it, there's a reference here on the bottom. It's a paper that explains this process a bit more in detail. Having said that, going back to the topic of our webinar today, audio development using game engines, this evaluation process took really, or still takes a heavy use of game engines, because game engines are used in this context. Unity is being used to drive the development as a platform for rendering the visuals and providing a lot of the platform, the basis for this development and evaluation frameworks we're using. Going back 2022 to 2024, so we're at the end of this so-called technology additions and improvement cycle. These are being done co-experiment, so new technologies being added and evaluated and improved, and then so on. So an iterative process to make this system more stable and efficient and feature-rich. So in a few weeks, hopefully we will achieve community draft that marks the end of the technical development. And a lot of people around the world working very hard right now to get the latest evaluations and the latest technology improvements ready for this April meeting. So when everything goes right, we're going through this standardization process aspects, going through those ballot periods, and if everything goes right, beginning of next year, 2025, there will be a new international standard. So now you know what it takes to create an MPEG software, MPEG standard. What are actually the use cases MPEG-I is all about? And I just picked three of them here. One is about immersive media. So the idea here is that there's a lot of immersive video also being developed, like light field video and volumetric video captures. And also for multimedia experience, you want to have an audio codec or an audio system that is capable of working with those new video formats, or legacy, or maybe not legacy, but more known formats such as 360 video, maybe with one or multiple viewpoints. So being able to have an audio rendering system that can support those immersive video formats. The second one is social VR. So the idea is here, you're having a kind of it's all about togetherness, virtually being together and enjoying a multimedia event, for example, a VR concert or kind of a VR broadcast and live. And the idea here is that you want to have an immersive experience, and you want to meet someone there, being there with someone else, and you also can communicate with this person or with other people there. So it's all about being immersed, feeling kind of teleported to this other place. And the third use case is maybe the telecommunication aspects. So you're having immersive teleconference meeting with multiple people, and you're having some room acoustics rendered, and it feels like very natural having this conversation. Yeah, but it's all also about communication, and also in both contexts, also aspects such as intelligibility as well as immersion. So it has to be balanced out that it feels plausible and but also very clear for the task of, for example, telecommunication meeting. Okay, yeah. So as I said, so some of the use cases might also be supported, could be supported by game engines, but MPEG-I is not really a game engine or not trying to be one. MPEG-I, for me, the I stands for really aspects such as interoperability, immersion, and interactivity. So let's take a look maybe what interoperability means here in this context. So on the left side, you see maybe kind of the authoring side where you can put content together. On the right side, you have the consumer side where you have the kind of rendered audio being, let's say, fed to a pair of headphones. So what do we need? What kind of technology pieces we need to transmit our scene? We see on the left side, and the audio signals to the right side, to the consumer side here. Okay, first we need a kind of a renderer so that can take the audio and renders it to a headphone output. Is that enough? No, it doesn't make much sense yet. So we go to our arsenal of tools and we use the MPEG-H 3D audio that's being already specified to take the PCM audio from the authoring side, doing a coding on that, and we can deliver that efficiently to the consumer side. So that's also not enough because we still need some metadata that tells us where are the audio assets that are being kind of authored into the visual scenes, where do they have to be placed. So and that's the new aspect of MPEG-I. We taking our visual scene, we making an abstraction of that, and we turning it into a so-called encoder input format, EIF. And this encoder input format is then a representation that can be taken by the MPEG-I encoder to create a metadata MPEG-I bitstream. So this bitstream contains all these scene descriptions that you need to render the audio assets to the right places. So are we done now? I think there's still something missing because we want to move our user interactively through the scene. So we need also interfaces that can tell the renderer where the user is, and also that can enable interactions using trigger commands and controllers and so whatnot. So we also want an interface that can describe our actual consumption area for augmented reality applications. For example, we want to render the audio with the same reverb aspects such as we have in our living room where we are right now. So this also has to be kind of, this information has to be delivered to the decoder and renderer. And then we have also personalization settings for the user to, for example, provide some sets of HRTFs that the user likes. And also we have features such as other audio inputs that don't come from the MPEG-H bitstream, but maybe from another source of live input. And we come to that later. So all that is essentially the entire MPEG-I system. What I marked here in red is actually these parts that are being normatively specified with MPEG-I. So this is what's being then being frozen at the end of our standardization process, whereas the parts that are in violet, these are components that are deliberately left open so that in the future these can further be developed and improved over time. But what's important is that the bitstream format and the decoding and rendering and the interfaces are fully defined by the end of the standardization process, so it can be then put into software and devices. Okay, so a quick word to this encoder input format, what I mentioned. So this is essentially a scene description format that was developed throughout the standardization process. And it's an XML description that holds all the information. Where are sound sources located? What is the geometry of the environment you're trying to put the scene in? that is being then later used for the reflections, very similar to what Simo mentioned at the beginning. And also other aspects such as trajectories where sources are being moved, and also conditions in terms of triggering and interactive rules, so to say. So these are the interoperability aspects of MPEG-I. Let's take a look at immersion and how immersion can be created in an MPEG-I here. And this is essentially all about simulating acoustics with all the effects you would expect. And this also in a kind of balance between authenticity and plausibility versus complexity that is needed for a real-time runtime environment. And on this image here, you see on the left a park scene. And on the right, you see kind of an abstraction of this park scenes that actually, this is what the acoustic renderer simulations inside the MPEG-I renderer would see. So you see the differences. So the bushes are not really bushes anymore. The trees are not trees. So things are much more simple. So because this is only what matters for the acoustic rendering. The colors, they represent different acoustic materials. And the acoustic materials have certain properties that are being then used for rendering the reflections and the transmission path. So we have absorption, transmission properties, and also how reflective a certain material is. For example, the bushes, they have also, you see here those bushes. They are having a transmission coefficient so that they can leave through some energy, but then absorb a few percentage, for example. Whereas, those pillars, they are just purely reflective. So as an example. So with this geometry descriptions, we can then later render reflections based on the location of the source and the location of the listener. And here on the right side, you see all those different reflection paths that are being computed from those fountain in the center with all the pillars to the listener that is being placed here. And we had a couple of there are two ways of computing those reflections. One way is the high quality way, where those reflection paths are being computed really based on the geometry. But perceptual research has shown that in many situations, much more kind of coarse reflection pattern are just fine, just work very well. So these reflection pattern don't cost so much to being computed. And therefore, this is also an option here. We call them the low complexity early reflections. And they only depend on a couple of properties that can be easily computed in real time. The high quality reflection pattern that take advantage of the encoding on the authoring side. So because many of those paths can be maybe predicted by analyzing the entire kind of world map of the scene. And this information is then being added to the bitstream. Yeah, we have also different options to render sound sources that have a certain extent. So sound sources are not just point sources, as many simulations might use, but they have an extent. Two examples here, we have the fountain again, and the piano to the right side. Whereas the fountain, it might not matter from which side you're looking at the fountain. It has, it sounds like water from everywhere. But with the piano, if the low pitches are on the left side and the high pitches on the right side, so there's a characteristic of this extended sound source, and there are those two different ways of rendering these sound extents with two different methods. Also, what Simo already mentioned, the aspects of diffraction and occlusion with objects. You can see here on the right side on the bottom. Here we're having a kind of a drum player, and the sound propagation is being blocked by this bus, what you see here. But you can also see that those rays kind of bend around the bus. These are the diffraction passes and arrive at listener that's placed here at the center of where all the rays arrive. All right, yeah. Final, I have two more. In terms of immersion, we also render the Doppler effect of moving objects in real time. That means when objects are passing by, or you're taking, let's say, a radio in this visual scene and moving the radio around, this Doppler effect will be rendered according to this movement in real time. And another aspect for immersion I find very important is the directivity of sound sources, especially if you notice that if you're in a room and you're talking to the wall, and then you're talking back into the room, how the sound is changing, the timbre of the sound in the room, and this is because of the reflections. No, it's because of the directivity pattern of the voice, and many sound sources have a directivity pattern that can be described during the authoring, and then also efficiently compressed. These kind of balloons, what you see here as a loudspeaker in the image. Yeah, also in terms of late reverb, when you have different rooms connected with each other, there's always kind of sound leaking from one room to another, and this can be also simulated. And I think this also helps to create some more convincing, immersive, plausible acoustic environment. There are a couple of more features in this MPEG-I that I think contributes very much to immersion. One is the own voice organization. So you might know this from computer games. You're talking or you're communicating with your peer over the headphone and on the closed microphone, but the audio is being meant to being transmitted directly to your friend or to your peer. What this own voice organization is, it is about feeding your own voice into the virtual environment, and this own voice will then be oralized and reverberated and can bounce throughout this virtual acoustic. And I find this personally very, very immersive, that suddenly you're in this concert hall or in this church and you can really sing with your microphone, and you suddenly can hear your voice in this concert hall and the church. And yeah, this makes suddenly you connect with this virtual environment, on a very different level suddenly. Another thing is for outer environments, there's some simulation for airflow. That means you can perceive the wind noise, and makes it very kind of more outdoorsy. And the final kind of feature I'd like to highlight here is a feature that instead of looping an audio track, we can now synthesizing a sound based on just some sound snippets, and they're being synthesized in a granular synthesis fashion. And that makes the sound more interesting because it changes over time. It does not repeat as a looped audio track, for example. And for example, it can be also connected to some kind of interactive trigger, like a gas pedal on your virtual world, or some kind of engine sound that would change, depending on some condition. So this is a nice little segue into the interactivity aspects. And I think the most important interactivity aspects in MPEG-I is, of course, the audio rendering. That is, 6 degrees of freedom. That means you're walking around. You can move your head orientation, and this will be rendered based on that. So that's, I think, a new kind of the most important differentiator compared to MPEG-H, where you can only have the 3 degrees of freedom rendering. Also here, the binaurization is done in a very efficient way, and also low latency aspects, because as you might know, higher latency also destroys the effect of immersion, because the interaction is just coming too late for your brain to be convinced that this is actually kind of plausible. Okay, and this is also maybe interesting. Besides headphone rendering, there's also a mode that you can render the sound over loudspeakers, and you can walk in your loudspeaker setup, and that the speed spot where you hear the sound will move with you. So this enables essentially experiencing virtual reality audio in a kind of in a way that does not require headphones, but it uses loudspeakers. And another, I think something else I'm curious about is, or I find it's very interesting or important, is the notion of accessibility in these systems. When we're creating software or solutions systems that for communication across different or for different people, we really need to make take advantage or take notion that we have to create technology that also is accessible for many people. And with MPEG-I, we're trying to mitigate user-specific sensory impairments directly while we're rendering the sound. That means, for example, we can reduce the reverb level to make the sound more clear, so that people with hearing impairments, for example, have a better chance of understanding this kind of this virtual cocktail party scene. Or we can also attenuate the sounds that are outside the area of interest, so that it makes it also easier for people to understand what the important aspects are in a scene. And this is all user-specific driven, so this can be configured for a certain user specifically. And so it's essentially a aspect of personalization. And a final aspects about interactivity is also the notion of being able to change the geometry in a scene. We're having a certain kind of a voxel mode. So it means here on the left side, you see there's a wall defined with a red voxel and the blue voxel, and in between all those voxels are essentially one material. And on the right side, this material can change based on those different colors, and suddenly you're having 3 different materials changed with those voxels. And suddenly the acoustic can then be simulated based on this new description of this different voxels here. So now the door opens, for example, because suddenly some voxels are having the characteristics of air instead of brick, for example. Okay, I think that brings me to an end here. Just would like to summarize when we're talking about MPEG-I immersive audio, we think a bit about those 3 I's, interoperability, immersion, and interactivity. And the goal of MPEG is always to create a technology that has a long-term stable impact. So if I open my hard drive and I have an MP3 file, I can still play it, even the technology is 30 years old or longer even, and roughly 30 years. And so we hope the goal or the aim, the vision is really that there might be also, in 30 years, there might be some MPEG-I content that still can be played and enjoyed, even the content was authored like many years ago in 2025. Yeah, brings me, if you want to learn more about MPEG-I, there's also a website. And also, if you happen to be in Japan in 2 weeks, there's an AES Audio for Games, and we have a conference paper on that topic, and there's also a demo you can enjoy there. For those of you who can't make it, I have a little video with me, and looking at the time, I think that's fine, Pedro. So I will just
Go ahead.
play that a bit. Okay.
Crank it up.
Yeah, crank it up. Oh, it's thing with. I hope you got all wet and the fountain now. I think
we
that
did.
marks the end of my presentation. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Niels. That was really good. Can you stop sharing? So we
Sure.
can...
Yeah.
Wow, I'm blown away. So how many people are a part of this project? Because it's so big. There's so many details. It's crazy.
Yeah, the photos. I think there are 6 or 7 working groups. So, but these are just delegates. So there are more people in the offices. So working on that.
But that picture you showed in the beginning, is that everybody that is also somehow involved in this, or?
No, this was video and systems and many others. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. This has been really, really rich in content and impressive information. I guess we still have 10 minutes to chat away, and we can start by, if you have like imminent questions in your head that you want to ask to each other right away, you then go ahead.
Well, there's Andre asked a good question about if there's some thoughts or discussion of a workflow that aggregates Wwise and MPEG-I.
That's a good one.
So yeah, and actually, so there's been discussion between Audiokinetic and Fraunhofer in the past, but I don't, to my knowledge, has not been a conversation in the recent years, and especially not about MPEG-I precisely. But Niels, since you're close to Fraunhofer, what is the expectation? Is it in replacement of Wwise? Is it expecting Wwise to output in an MPEG-I format? Or when you talk about that with your colleagues, how is it framed?
Yeah, no, I mean, while it's not about replacement, I mean, it's not the idea is not to create a game or kind of a system for a game engine or something like this. I think it's more really in the tradition of what MPEG is doing, creating a codec plus rendering that fits very well with the video broadcast area and so on. And but I mean, as I said, the use cases that are part of that they're maybe inspired by game engines, but it's not the idea is not to be a game engine, so to say. I think when you guys started 2005 or 2003, you wouldn't expected that you would create audio car engine sounds or something like that. So I think you would never know where things go and where people find use of that. And let's see what the future brings. Yeah.
Yeah. Also see him from the outside. It seems like it's more of a fit. At least when I was following both, I could imagine how you guys could somehow work together. At least for me, that was quite. It looked like a match.
Yeah, I mean the bitstream aspects. I think the important thing that so I don't know whether you work much with or where the size of your assets are important, or what you need to ship, whether it makes a difference. It's 10 gigabyte or 10 gigabyte or 20 gigabyte, whether it makes a difference.
Well, it's always, again, that's the developer on the other side that will kind of scale the experience based on what they can afford and how crazy they go with building so many assets. Our responsibility is more to make sure that if they go crazy and they want to create the most gigantic audio content ever, that Wwise will not collapse on itself and be able to still during the creation, right? So that the artist can keep using the tool and the experience is smooth. and later at runtime to allow the game to load, partial aspect or content of the project, and basically load on demand what's there, because there's a limit to memory and there's a limit to a lot of things. So that's mostly where we will make sure that all those systems are ready for that, and then we let the creators go crazy as much as they want, and there can be surprising. Yeah. The very first game that using 100, no, not 100, but 1 million audio assets was back in 2011.
Wow.
And at the time, Wwise was a 32-bit application only, and we had to port it to a 64-bit. Actually, the game developer has started that work, and we helped them, and we had to come up with a Wwise 64-bit version because it couldn't load all the sounds. So yeah,
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about what you said, Simon, that, depending on what people want to, the experience that people want to create in the game, sometimes you don't want to create something realistic, right? And what Niels is doing is actually quite trying to be as realistic as you can, right? So it's like an option, right? It's not like in some games, it would be perfect to use this, the MPEG-I approach, and in other games, it's not. So it's like, it sounds more like something if you want to go that way, you can go to Wwise and select, okay, these are the things that we should use, the algorithms or whatever, you have it in there. Does that make sense?
So for us, that's pretty much what I was trying to stress out there, that there's a spectrum, and you select your things according to that. What you presented, Niels, alluded to aiming at reality, but is it, or can people dial things in a way that it would sound totally unexpected?
Yeah, on the authoring, I mean, with the authoring parameters, you have a lot of choices. So the goal is whatever you decide. So on the authoring side should be, these are the instructions how things are being then rendered. We are in this kind of development phase. So for us, it's there's no frame of reference but the visual content. So at the moment, I think it's easier, and even this is challenging to render something that really matches your expectations from what you see in this Unity rendering, the visual rendering. So yes, we can. I think we can have a speed of sound from we can change that and so on, and create very strange environments and so on. This is possible, but it's not really maybe the best use of finding bugs at this point, or improving efficiency and quality, and so therefore I think we are kind of traditionally kind of reverting to experiences we can kind of relate to from the real world, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me. It's just it's interacting with those developers over all those years. You realize sometimes that it doesn't make sense from somebody outside the project, or but when you go into the game design, and because the gameplay is the important aspect in video games, at least, and that's where sometimes you had to cheat reality in ways you would never imagine, just because it's fun to play that game, or to perform better and shooting other people, things like that. So
guys, we got a couple of questions here. So has Wwise been used in any larger theater plays, and would MPEG-I function in QLab, or is that a figure 53 matter? I don't know if that makes sense for you, but it doesn't make sense for me.
Maybe I can answer the first questions in there. So yes, Wwise has been used in theater play, and even back in the days. And again, a bit like the NFL things, where somebody was playing the crowd. So there's a few theater play out there where it's just easier to punch cues and get music to come in, come out, that kind of things. And last week we were at 2 weeks ago we were with the USITT. So that's a U.S. organization with the theater world, and basically having Wwise to render the sound that goes into other hardware system like Mayors or QLabs or things like that. So yeah, it's used especially theater, location-based entertainment. That's where you've got a lot of different configurations that are not as like listener focused as games. So in games, you expect there's a listener, there's a player, and that person has a point of view. When you go in location-based and there's multiple people experiencing the same experience simultaneously, then you need different type of solutions to the same problems, or or new problems arise. So again, that's when it starts getting fun, because we see new stuff and we try to help them figure out solutions. Yeah.
Oh, all right. What about the next question? With Wwise, could you please elaborate a little more on how the raycasting is being used, which parameters are controlled based on the raycasting? I guess low pass filtering, volume control, for example. And has there been any finding on the right trade-off between the complexity and perceptual relevance?
That's a fantastic question just there. So the ray casting is really to find, so it's when you use the geometry aspect. So because rooms and portals, we already know where the walls are. When we receive the geometry, then we have to cast rays to understand the geometry around the listeners and around the various emitters. And we store that information, and at runtime, basically, as we render all those emitters, then we can apply, diffraction and room transmissions, and basically the same phenomena that I was showing, that Neil's shown as well. So you seem to be, of course, there's not 1,000 different phenomena, right, for audio. So we're using the raycasting to understand the geometry and then apply the right transformation or effects, and yes, to change the volume, to change low pass filter, high pass filters. The new versions of Wwise, we're introducing high shelf filters for some of these phenomena, because it sounds more natural and smoother. So the expectation we have with this change is that it's going to be easier for the end user to fine tune and mix an experience that sounds plausible and rich. So in the end, the authoring aspect of that is really you're in Wwise, and you spend a lot of time in graphs where you map something on the x-axis versus the y-axis, right? Your volume based on room transmission coefficient, or diffraction percentage, or distance, or angles, things like that. So and again, the choice, and that was a choice back in 2000, early 2000, where instead of trying to mimic the natural fall off of sound, we said no, it's going to be a graph. You can put as many points as you want, and if you want after 50 meters to raise the volume up for a reason and then go down, this is up to you. It might be something that the game is asking for, and that's the solution for you. So we've always been driven to provide flexibility instead of imposing a certain reality or a certain fixed path. I don't know how much it answers your question.
It's very clear. That's really great. Do you guys have any more questions for each other?
No, I'm just curious what the future might bring, and also in terms of interactivity and immersion. When you remember this timeline, I saw 20 years ago we thought 5.1 is amazing. We feel like we are in front of this band in the concert hall, and now it's like, if it's not interactive, it's not if the sound doesn't adapt to your movement, you feel something is wrong almost. So I think we as users, we really kind of driving technology, and we are also very quickly embracing and adapting to what is possible. So, and I really wonder what can't even imagine in 20 years or 15 years what is the new normal then. So.
Yeah, I don't know too. I'm quite curious, and how much machine learning will help assisting the artist and maybe freeing more time for creative decisions to the artists while these algorithms figure out the geometry and simplify it and take the hard grinding work off, and as an artist you can focus on the quality, the artistic quality of things. I hope our future will aim in that direction. We'll see where it goes exactly. So you said 20 years ago 5.1 was the thing, and we kept adding speakers just to realize that we're back to headphones, and that's the main device today, right? It's headphones. And the holy grail of that is personalized HRTF, which nobody figured out yet how to provide that in a mass market type of things where Google controls its ecosystem, Apple its own, Microsoft, and everyone is controlling its thing. So how can you get your personalized HRTF to carry across devices and type of experience? I think that's one of the main bottleneck that I hope will find a solution collectively between those gigantic corporations. I don't know.
That's a great way to
possible.
Yeah, that's a great way to conclude, guys, because we're already 5 minutes ahead. So this has been very, very informative and very inspiring. Thank you both for really good work you're doing for so many years. Keep going. I just want to say that people can still, when they leave, they can answer the 5 questions we have to improve the webinars. But I can see there's also like a couple of questions more, but they can always ask you, people will get an email, follow-up email. They can ask you afterwards. Thanks a lot. And it's been a pleasure for me.
Great. Thanks for inviting us. Great content, Thanks. Neil. Nice to meet you. And see you in Japan, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do that.
Okay.
I wish I could go.
Thanks, everyone, attending.
Thank you, Samir.
All right.
Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.